All right, so today we're going to be going over accessory lifts and how we view strength and accessory movements in hypertrophy training. So before we get into anything, I do just have to say rest in peace and give my condolences to accessory lifts because that will not be a term after this video. That term will be dead and we will stop viewing our training that way. In all seriousness, I do want to start this off by saying I'm not anti-strength and I'm not anti-powerlifting. There's nothing wrong with training like this. But if hypertrophy is your goal, this mindset of having big compound movements and having accessory movements over here is terrible, and it literally makes no sense, and I hope to change your mind throughout this video. This doesn't make sense, so I will explain my thought process throughout this video. So first we need to ask, where did this term come from? So obviously we've all heard the term accessory or assistance movement, and just based on the definition and what this means on its own, we instinctively and kind of subconsciously view that as inferior, because when you say something's an accessory, you're implying that there's something more important that lift directly helps. And when I say something is more important, I'm talking about another lift. When you're training for hypertrophy, this really doesn't make sense, and I'll go over my thought process in this video. So basically, this term came from powerlifters that used certain movements to assist their strength on the squat, bench, and deadlift, and that spawned the term accessory or assistance lift. There's a bunch of different ways to say it, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to stick with the term accessory. I think that's the one that's thrown around the most often that we all have a basic understanding of. To define the word accessory, to really figure out what this truly means, it's a thing which can be added to something else in order to make it more useful, versatile, or attractive. So in itself, that literally makes no sense for hypertrophy because there's no one magical lift. There's no one big lift that gives you all your gains that we just need to master. It just doesn't exist for hypertrophy. There's literally no way to find a magical lift. There's no way to get your entire complete physique just on one lift. There's no one lift that every bodybuilder or everybody training for hypertrophy absolutely has to do. If you think that there is a lift, like maybe the squat, bench, or deadlift, if you think one of those needs to be done to build muscle and get bigger, you're mistaken. Not that there's anything wrong with those movements or those movement patterns, but there's absolutely not one lift that you have to do to get bigger. The reason for this is because building muscle isn't actually a sport. Building muscle is just, it's an activity, it's a hobby, it's something that we do. It's like going to work to make money, like we go to the gym to build muscle. We're not competing in an actual event that we have to perform in against other people, like powerlifting. Obviously, they have to standardize that into 3 different lifts that are universal that we can all compete in. But when you're trying to build muscle, you can do it in any way possible, whether you're competing or not. It doesn't matter how you actually got that muscle. You just have to have it. That's what it comes down to. So in this case, you can call any movement that has carryover by strength or by muscle an accessory lift, and that would be valid because those movements are helpful but inferior and incomplete on their own. So again, this only makes sense if you're talking about a bigger goal of powerlifting or strength training. The desired outcome when training for hypertrophy is to build muscle, not to get stronger. So why do we classify certain lifts as accessory lifts, and why would we do that? And why would we do a lift that is inferior to another lift anyways when trying to build muscle? So in itself, when you think about that, if a lift in your mind is inferior than another lift, you should not be doing that at all. It has no place in your program. Like if a lift is not equal to something else, don't do it. It makes no sense. There's 2 situations here. It's either a legitimately bad lift that has no use, or you're just viewing it incorrectly. My guess is you're viewing it incorrectly, so that's what I'm trying to explain here. But if there's a lift that is actually classified as an accessory movement in your hypertrophy training program, it just doesn't make any sense. If anything, the strength work is the accessory work for hypertrophy. It allows you to build a base of strength and coordination, which doesn't build muscle, but it indirectly can. So that does very little for actually building muscle. So when you look at this from a technical perspective, strength work is more of an accessory than actual hypertrophy work that we've been labeling as accessory work. So we have it backwards, guys. Like, strength work, if you're just going to go in and do your strength work, like think about it this way. If you're just going in to do strength work, yeah, I mean, you'll get like a little bit bigger and you'll get a lot stronger, but that's not complete on its own. It needs some type of actual hypertrophy training program to make it work. That is like just one tiny little piece that you don't necessarily even have to do. It's just helpful. It's like an accessory to the meat and potatoes of your workout program, which is your hypertrophy movements, whether it's an isolation or a compound, a free weight, a machine, a cable. It literally doesn't matter. It's just what fits into your actual training program. So that's what you need to be doing in hypertrophy rep ranges with hypertrophy volume, hypertrophy technique. I'm going to give myself a tongue twist by saying hypertrophy so many times in such a short period of time, but I think you get the point I'm trying to make here. This is why so many powerlifters and power builders have incomplete and imbalanced physiques. Even though they might train every muscle group, they don't put much thought or effort into the lift itself, let alone programming and progressions. Strength training and powerlifting is generally more exciting than hypertrophy training anyways, so lots of lifters who care about size and strength equally will bias the strength work because you make measurable, concrete improvements in week-to-week training. And there's nothing wrong with this way of training at all, but it comes down to priorities. Anyone who trains for hypertrophy will get stronger, and anyone who trains for strength will get bigger. But the difference is in anticipated results. Powerlifters anticipate a strength increase, so when they even see a tiny little bit of size increase, they're happy because they didn't anticipate it, and this goes vice versa for bodybuilders gaining a little bit of strength. When powerlifters tell bodybuilders to just get stronger in order to increase size, there's some truth to it, but it's far from optimal. To flip that around, to powerlifters out there, if you asked me how to get stronger and I said, just get bigger, there's still truth to it, but again, it's far from optimal and it sounds absolutely ridiculous to say. So that's like going to work and expecting to get paid a certain amount, and then all of a sudden you get like a bonus, or your boss gives you an extra bonus or something. Like, that is unanticipated. So even if it's like a $50 bill or a $25 gift card or something, like, that's not what we were anticipating. So it's great. It's cool. It's like, oh, sweet, I got a little thing on the side here, a little bit of strength, or a little bonus from work or something. We weren't expecting it, so therefore we're happy with it. But if we were anticipating a $1,000 bonus at the end of the month and you get a $50 bill from your boss, that is suboptimal, right? So that's the same exact way. If you just transfer it over to training, that's the same way that we're talking about the training here. So why are we prioritizing our strength work over our hypertrophy work? We put so much thought and effort into our compound lifts and get caught up in our strength numbers that we lose sight of our goal of building muscle and start to treat our hypertrophy lifts like supplemental work for bigger strength numbers, causing us to treat those lifts like busy work. In any program where you're training for strength and size, the strength work will slowly take priority, whether we realize it or not, due to chasing the reward of adding weight to the bar. So clearly there's a little bit of a problem here where it's easy to get caught up in that kind of instant gratification. And I'm not saying that people that train for strength are training for instant gratification by any means, but when you're training for bodybuilding, it's like grueling training because you don't see any immediate benefits. So what a lot of us end up doing, and again, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with this. Like, if it keeps you in the gym, that's fine. Personally, I don't need to do it. I don't care whatsoever about my strength. But what happens is you get caught up in this strength work and you end up having to prioritize it because you need to be fresh. You need to hit that new PR. And now that is all you're going to the gym for, and you kind of half-ass your accessory work. I'm not saying this even happens to everybody or even most people, but it does happen to a lot of people training for hypertrophy, and we need to put an end to this. What you need to do is keep that mental discipline to go in, get into like that mindset, get into that meditative mindset of crushing a hypertrophy workout. You don't need to be like hitting all these crazy numbers and hitting PRs all over the place. Like, if you need some type of instant reward or instant gratification, just like get a pump. I mean, that's honestly a much better thing to do because, yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to get you crazy gains. Like, the pump isn't necessarily correlated with increased muscle size. But if anything, it's either going to be neutral because it's certainly not counterproductive, or it's going to give you a little bit of benefit. And it's a lot of fun too, and that will keep you in the gym. So I'd recommend, if you do need some type of like motivation or reward to go to the gym, chase that instead of necessarily trying to chase that 1 rep max or really heavy triples or something in your strength work. That will allow you to focus on your hypertrophy work and actually probably improve your technique on a lot of different lifts. The term accessory implies that the lift you're doing is not only mildly important, but it implies that other lifts you do are of more importance than others, which makes no sense for hypertrophy because there are no specific lifts that you need to do to build muscle. And even though getting stronger over time is important, improving one lift by using another lift defeats the purpose of getting stronger on that initial lift. Does this make sense now? If you go into a lift with the mindset of it being inferior, you're setting yourself up to fail. This is why so many lifters struggle to grow their calves and their arms and their forearms, because we're stuck in a mindset of viewing those lifts as inferior. So what happens is you have these specific muscle groups that are correlated with specific lifts. What we do is we prioritize these big, heavy compound lifts, whether because we care about our strength numbers or we go into the gym to be rewarded by these big increases and we just want to go on these super heavy lifts because we can incrementally add more weight because 5 pounds is a lower percentage, allowing us to overload more often, or whatever the reason is. The problem here is you're missing the point of your entire hypertrophy training and you're going in with the wrong mindset. So these big lifts, no matter why you do them, you're prioritizing the muscles that are correlated with those lifts. In any lift that you call an accessory, you are half-assing. We all know when it comes to hypertrophy training, you can't just treat it like half-ass busy work, because that's what grows your muscle. Like, that's why you're in the gym. So that's why all these guys have small arms, they have small forearms, they have small calves. That's why you see all these muscle groups that aren't necessarily correlated with the big 3 lifts are always lagging. And that's fine if it's a lagging muscle group on a power lifter, because that muscle doesn't necessarily help them lift more. But when you're training for hypertrophy and you're training more like a power lifter and you're putting all your effort and mental energy into these lifts, like, you shouldn't be surprised when you have a lot of lagging muscle groups and your physique looks super unproportionate and unbalanced. I'm not saying we all have to have a specific perfect physique, but in general, we want to have some type of balance throughout our physique. We want to have general overall growth, and that's what gives you that good physique. That's what gets you bigger. You can't just have 3 big muscles and look jacked. That's just not how it works. If skull crushers build the triceps just as much as bench press builds the chest, why are skull crushers called an accessory movement? And why is the chest superior to the triceps? This is another point kind of continuing off my last one. Obviously, our physiques are customizable, but every muscle group needs to be viewed as with equal importance if you want a complete physique. So, assuming we all want a proportional and complete physique with no lagging muscle groups or untrained muscle groups, this just makes the most sense. Just because getting your strength up or getting better at or building muscle on your triceps will help your bench press doesn't mean, well, more than your bench press will help your triceps, doesn't mean that's the accessory, because at the end of the day, we're not chasing performance on a certain lift. We're chasing overall volume and overall growth on every muscle group. An example that I think will resonate with you is the deadlift compared to the lat pull down. So a similar example here to my last one. Everyone would be so quick to say that the lat pull down is an accessory to the main movement, which would be the deadlift. But if our goal is to increase the size of our lats, why would the lat pull down be the inferior movement? The lat pull down is only an accessory movement if our goal is to increase the strength of our deadlift. Does this make sense now? I hope you guys are starting to understand this. If you have questions, let me know. I'd love to talk about this stuff with you guys. But basically what I'm trying to get at here is, why, just because one lift you're trying to progress on strength why would another lift be called an accessory movement? Obviously, if you get your lats super jacked, it will help your deadlift strength. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to grow our lats, why are we viewing the lat pull down as inferior or an accessory or afterthought to the deadlift? It doesn't really make much sense at all when you really think about it. The mindset we have adopted from powerlifters is the reason why so many of us have lagging muscle groups that always happen to be the ones not targeted through the squat, bench, and deadlift. I speak from experience here. You see power builders and power lifters all the time. Power lifters is kind of a different one because they're not really training for hypertrophy, but in general, even the power lifters that do train for hypertrophy or do their accessory work, the muscles that they train for accessory work, have you ever seen powerlifters train their accessory movements that are like not barbells? They don't try. And so be it. Do whatever you want if you're a powerlifter, but they half-ass these movements, and that's okay because it's not necessarily their goal. But at the end of the day, when you're all excited and ready to crush your strength work, and then you just kind of see your everything else or your accessory movements as an afterthought, you're not going to train them with that much intensity. So even though a lot of powerlifters do train these accessory movements, that's the last time I'm saying that, those muscle groups that they still even train through those movements are still lagging. And that's because they're not actually trying. The reason why so many people don't get results in hypertrophy-focused lifts is because they don't actually train them with enough intensity and energy and effort. And that's a common problem that you see all the time. Even if you just go on social media and look at like actual powerlifters or strength athletes or even bodybuilders and like physique guys, like they don't actually try on their accessory movements. I'm not saying this is the case for everybody, but the amount of times I've seen videos of guys that are trying to get bigger, work out, and go all out and track and record everything on their compounds, then just like half-ass their cable flies or half-ass their dips or curls or push downs or something, like what are you doing? Just because those movements like hurt and because they're harder and they're not as exciting doesn't mean you just don't try on them. That's completely backwards for hypertrophy. To get out of this mindset, this is the final thought I want to leave you guys with. I know it's been a little bit of a longer video, but this is an important one. To get out of this mindset, we need to realize that every muscle has its own lift that will grow it optimally. And whether that movement is a compound or isolation, a barbell or a machine or a cable, at the end of the day, that does not matter because performance isn't the goal. We're trying to basically accrue all this volume and tonnage to increase the size of that muscle. Obviously, get stronger over time, add weight if you have to. It's not a bad idea to push for that strength increase by training properly in the first place, but just training for strength is not going to do anything for you. And you don't want to turn these hypertrophy movements into strength movements, but you do want to slowly get stronger and slowly do more volume on these movements. Without going too much further on this, I hope all that made sense to you guys. And I hope you guys have a different perspective of what accessory movements are and why we need to get rid of them, and why, if anything, basically accessory movements would be your strength work, not your hypertrophy work. So I'm going to leave it at that today. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, let me know.